All right, so this video is going to go over the basics of setting up the Moodle. We went over this in class a couple weeks ago, and I did end up having a technical issue with the video, so I'm going to simply recreate it here and go back over the basic setup functions when you first go into a Moodle. Not so much about what goes into it, but just about getting things like titles and how the Moodle is displayed and so on all set up. So to begin with, when you're entering into the Moodle area, heading towards, say, our class Moodle, there is a category for all of your student Moodles, EDT 530 student Moodles. And inside that, you will find the Moodles for each of you individually. I'm going to be using my sample Moodle to demonstrate this on so that we're looking at basically what you would look at from the beginning. So you click on your Moodle and that will take you into the basic home screen for the Moodle. Before we get into changing anything, just a couple of things about the basic layout. Moodle is basically functions in three columns, left, center, and right. The center column is where the class content will show up. That's basically the main part of the Moodle. And then there are two columns to either side that are designed to hold what they call blocks. And some of the blocks will always be there. The administrative block, navigation, other blocks you can actually add blocks or remove the blocks so that you can kind of customize those. They tend to be not so much about the actual content of your Moodle, but more about add-ons, things like adding a calendar or a search area, upcoming events, latest news. So those are places to put maybe additional items that don't directly relate to your Moodle, but which your students might find helpful. So in terms of the blocks, you as the administrator can choose which blocks your students will have access to. As a user, the users have the ability to do some customizing on their own screen, and this is not for everyone. So each block has on it a minus button, and what that will do when you click on it is collapse that. It doesn't get rid of it. It's still there. It just, for the user, it takes up less space on their screen. So if they don't want to be looking at that, they can close it. The other option that they have is to dock the block. And what that will do is turn the block into a tab that is over on the left-hand side of the screen. And that's just, again, another way for an individual user to kind of customize how their screen space is being used. To bring it back, they just go over onto the tab and click on it, or they can also undock and it'll take it right back to where it was for when you set it up. So those blocks, that's basically what's happening with the blocks. So the users can change how they show up. You as the administrator are the one that actually determines what blocks are available. And I'll show you how to add new blocks once we get into the edit mode. All right, so in terms of what you're seeing on the screen, three columns, main content in the middle, blocks on either side. At the moment, we can't do anything with this other than just look at it. So we need to enter into the editing mode for the Moodle. You can do that one of two ways. In the top right-hand corner above the blocks, there's a button that says Turn Editing On. Also down in the administration block, there is also the option to turn editing on. They will both do exactly the same thing. It just gives you two different places to access that. When you turn the editing on, everything will still be on the screen, but you'll notice that things kind of expand and you get all of these edit pull downs and some additional ads, add activity or resource items that will allow you to go into each of the items that's here and alter it and so on. While we're here, before we get into the general settings, now that I'm in editing mode, down here below the administration block is now a new block that allows you to add a block. So this is what would let you choose from their list, and they've got a pretty extensive list of blocks that you could decide to add into your course. We're not going to spend a lot of time looking at those in the scope of this class, but if you want to explore any of those, certainly feel free to do so. Also, now that we're in editing mode, if there is a block that you do not want to have there, the gear, the actions for any given block will also allow you to remove that block from the Moodle. And in that case, your students will not see it. It will be gone. You can also hide the block, which will leave it there, but your students will not be able to see it. So if you have something that you want to have set up, but you don't want your students to see it all the time, you can also hide something. And we're going to see that that's something you can do with anything in the Moodle. All right. So that is getting into adding blocks and so on. So the main area that we're going to be focusing on with this is not the content that's going into your Moodle, but changing the overall setup of your Moodle. So over here in administration, edit settings, and when you go there, it's going to take you to the page that basically gives you access to all of the main core administrative functions for the Moodle. It's relatively self-explanatory, and a lot of these areas we're not going to really do much with. They get into some more advanced functions that really kind of go beyond the scope of this class. The main ones are going to be the first few categories here. So just starting at the top with general, here's where you can set the actual name of your course. I did this with our EDT 530 and 520 Moodles. When the school set them up, they had different longer names on them, and I went in and changed them so that they made a little bit more sense. The short course name, that is what shows up here in the navigation bar. So especially if you've got a course name that's on the longer side, giving it a shorter name, a descriptive name, just means that this bar across the top here will not take up as much room. So, but you get to choose those two things. Even if it's a class that's been set up for you by someone else, you have the ability, if you're the teacher, to change the course name and the short name. The category, this would be more if you were administrating an entire site, but this tells it which category the course is going to go into. Leave this one alone for us because this is what puts it into that student Moodle category so that we can find them. You can actually hide the entire course. If you're preparing a class and you don't want it visible for people to get to, you can hide the class so you can continue to work on it, but your students won't be able to access it. And you also have the ability to set a course start date. Again, if you only want the class to become available at a certain time, or if you're using a format, there's a couple of formats for the Moodles that are linked to weeks, to actual calendar weeks. And what this will do is give it its starting date so it knows how to automatically date those weeks. And then course ID number if that's something that applies. Course description and summary files, if you want to supply one. These won't show up on your Moodle page, but in the page where the courses are listed, this description would show up there. So again, if you're administering multiple classes, you could put in a little catalog cut here or something, just giving a quick description of your course, what it's going to cover, and so on, and you can add files. By the way, going off of last night's class, any of these fields that is a text entry field, you have the ability to format text, to put in links, to put in media. We have this expanded text editing palette for fonts and other text formatting functions. So at any point in any of the Moodle options, when you're in one of these text screens, you have all of those toolbar options for formatting your text. All right, next category is the course format. And this is one that is what determines how the class is actually constructed on the page. There are 5 different formats that you can choose from. Single activity format is exactly what it says. That would be the only thing you could do would be post one single activity. That would be if you had maybe you're using the lesson activity and you have a complete set of things that are all built into one activity, and you just want your students to go to that one thing and do that one thing. That's obviously not what we're going to be using in this course, but that's what that one is for. Social format really then just creates a Moodle that is just about forums, just about interaction between teacher and students. So it limits the activities and so on that can be added. Again, that's not a format that we're going to be using because it does limit how you can interact with the Moodle. The ones we're going to be really dealing with are these two, collapsed topics and just regular topics format. To collapse topics, what that will do is create a toggle for each section of your Moodle. And that toggle, again, is about your user having the control over viewing or not viewing the content. So if they've already completed the first couple of units or sections, they can collapse those sections, and then they can just be looking at the material from the third section. So that's really about user interaction. It just gives your students a chance to open and close the content by section. If it's in just regular topics, that will have all the topics listed out, but they will not have those toggles located at the top. So in that case, the student will just see your entire Moodle from top to bottom, and they will just have to scroll up and down to find the unit that they want. Weekly format, that one, again, we're not going to use for this course because that will then automatically tie in each of your sections to a calendar week. And since we are not really functioning in that way, we're not going to use that format. But down the road, if you're using Moodle for actual delivery, that's a way to automatically tie in each section's content to a calendar week. So again, we will mainly be choosing between collapsed topics or regular topics. The choice is really yours in terms of how you want your students to interact with your material. Number of sections is right here. You simply choose the number of sections that you're going to use. You can always come back and add sections or delete sections. If you have 10 sections and there's material in the 10th section and then you go to 9 sections, it automatically creates a section that it calls orphaned material and will put that content in that extra section. So it will never delete content even if you remove the section that content is in. It'll always still be there. If you are using hiding sections and you have the ability as the teacher, again, to not make something visible until a certain time, this just simply says if you've hidden a section, how does it show up to the student? Either they'll show up in collapsed form, meaning that the student will know there's a section there and they'll see the title of the section, but they won't be able to see anything inside it. Or you can make hidden sections completely invisible. So if you don't want your students to know what's coming up, then when you hide it, they would not even know that that section exists until you make it hidden or unhidden. And then the final option here is the course layout, and this just has to do with your multiple sections. Are you going to put all the sections on one page or have your student move from page to page to page? Probably for this class, you're going to just stay with the show all sections on one page. But if you're developing a more involved Moodle where sections have a lot of material in them, you might want to go to the one section per page, again, just to clean up and to allow students to really focus in on one section's worth of material. If you're in the regular topics format, those are your only options. If, however, you've chosen the collapsed topic format, there's going to be a bunch of additional options that show up. Those options are almost entirely about the toggles, about those control buttons that your students will see. So for example, if I go back to my Moodle now, you'll see that there are these toggles for each section. And all of those additional options are about customizing these. You can change the colors. You can change the icon that shows up at the side. You can change the text formatting for what shows up on the toggles. So again, if you're using one of those collapsed format, then you will have all these additional things. What goes on the toggle, how it's structured, the number of columns, then the text. Here's the text alignment for the toggles, the icon, what the icon is. They give you a bunch of different options for icons. And then a bunch of color choosers for the foreground and background, and when somebody's hovering over the toggle and when they're not hovering over the toggle. So that just, again, these only show up when you're using those collapsed versions, just some additional options for you to customize your Moodle a bit. All right, that's really kind of it in terms of what we are going to be interacting with in terms of Moodle setup. There are other options down here. Appearance gets into themes, which I believe that our choice of themes is pretty limited because of the administrative decisions that Central has made regarding their use of Moodle. You have an option of showing your gradebook to the students. We will get into the gradebook a little bit down the road. And then there's some additional things about groups and roles and so on. But again, those we're not going to really need to make use of in the scope of this particular class. All right, so in conclusion for that, so this is in the edit settings. This is where you will be coming to make those big umbrella decisions about your Moodle, how many sections, whether those sections are collapsed, whether they show up on their own pages, what the name of your course is, all of those types of options. All right, so when we go back to, and actually I'm going to go to the collapsed format for my own, save and return. You do have to save these when you've made changes, you have to save. So back on the main Moodle page, there's a couple more things for me to point out. One of them, in terms of your sections, in terms of naming your sections, you do that right from this home page. If you're in editing mode, you will have a little pencil tool next to your section name, and that allows you to go in and rename your sections to there we go. You have to hit the enter key in order for it to accept. That's what happened to me there. So you can rename your sections to be whatever makes sense for you. So that is the one toggle thing that you can edit here on the main screen. For every element in your Moodle, you're going to have this gear that says edit. And there's a bunch of functions that are going to be similar across all of them. The first one is going to be the edit. This one says edit section. On the others, it'll say edit settings. That is how you get back into the individual setup for each activity or resource or title or whatever it is. So that's your main way to get back into an element and make changes to it or add material to it. You can highlight. You can hide sections, and also if it's an individual activity or resource, for instance, if I go up here, there's the edit settings, I can also hide. And that will not delete it, but it will not make it visible to your students. So that's a good way if you've got something in process or in progress that you're not ready to have your students look at yet, then that hide option will let you just hide it from your user. So we have that edit. If it's an activity or a resource, you also have the ability to indent the activities. So for example, let me go down into my first section here. I'm going to just quickly add a label and call this label number 1. I'm not feeling entirely creative right now. So that section now has this item, label number 1. If I go into its edit and say move right, then it will indent that item. I can keep moving it right. I can move it to the left. This is not about how it functions. This is all about how the Moodle is organized visually. I typically will leave my labels all the way to the left. And then any items that are sort of part of that label, I will indent in so that it's easy to see that they're grouped together. But you can use that formatting however you feel necessary in terms of making your Moodle visually accessible. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out here, well, you can also delete an item. This is how you would get rid of something if you didn't want it there. You can also duplicate, and I make use of this a lot. If I've got a particular item that's going to show up every week, rather than recreating it, I will create it once, I will duplicate it, and then simply move that item into the right location. So those are your edit items. In terms of adding activities and resources, and I know we saw a bit of this in last night's class as well, there's sort of two ways to look at it. When you first go in, you're just going to have this one option in each section that says add an activity or resource. And when you click on it, it's going to give you the whole list of all the activities and resources. On the other hand, over here in administration, there's something that they call the activity chooser. If that is turned on, then what you end up with is two pull-down menus. One of them has the resources in it, and one of them has the activities in it. They both give you access to exactly the same items. It just splits them up differently. So that's all about just how you prefer to find things. That's what that activity chooser is. So that gets you to those choosers. Moving, the other thing that you can do with anything you've created is move it, and that's what this little plus arrow icon is. So let's say I've got a couple of resources in here. Let me add a page. So now I've got two items here, the label and the page. And let's say that I want the page actually to be above the label. I simply grab this, drag up, and then let go, and then it reorganizes them. You can even drag items between sections. So that's how, if I've duplicated something, I can take that duplicate and I can drag it into another section and reuse it there. So that's your ability to move items around. So you've got editing options for each item, and then you can move them around as well. The last item at this point is simply to point out that you also, down here in the administration block, have this option of switching your role. Right now you are viewing your Moodle as the teacher, which means you will see all the hidden items. If I go up here and hide this, it still shows up to me. It's just grayed out. I can still edit it, I can still change it, I can still move it around. It just won't be seen by my students. But if you want to see what your Moodle will look like to your students, and I always do this just to double check to make sure that everything is hidden and unhidden as needed, you can switch your role, and I usually would switch my role to the student, and then you will see the Moodle exactly the way that your students will see it. And it'll even tell you up here that you are viewing it as a student, and that's just a good way for you to double check that everything looks the way you want it to look for your students, and so on. So that option is available to you too. And then you can come back and simply switch your role back to your normal role, and then you will be back to seeing everything. Okay, so to quickly recap, this video was about just the basic Moodle setup, not about so much the content or the organization of the content, but just getting things set up. You've got your 3 columns, blocks in the left and right column. You can add and delete blocks. Students will be able to either collapse them or dock those blocks just so that for their own visual. You go into editing mode. Editing mode then allows you to make the changes. In editing mode, you can go into edit settings. That gives you all of the options for making choices about how your Moodle displays, the title of the course, the summary of the course, the format of the course, whether there's hidden collapsed topics or not, how to format the toggles, and really gets the Moodle set up so that it looks the way you want. On the main page in edit mode, you can make alterations to section titles. You can add resources, you can add activities, you can move those activities around, you can edit those activities, you can hide those activities, and do all of those sorts of items. And then you can always switch your role to a student role so that you can view your Moodle as your students will see it. So if you have any questions about any of this material, please feel free to get in touch with me. But this should get you going in terms of your basic Moodle setup. And then we will have, I will post an additional video that will recap the material that we covered in our third week class, where I talked a little bit more about the resources and some of the editing of text and so on. All right, thank you very much for your attention, and let me know if you have any questions.